Let me start by saying that we are delighted to welcome you to this Tapestry Roundtables on Old Cities' New Risks. Understanding how climate change impacts urban centers like Mumbai is at the very heart of the Tapestry project. In particular, the latest IPCC assessment report has reiterated that our world's coastal megapolises are on the front line of climate change. Today, we're living in a world that is considerably warmer than it was at the outset of the Industrial Revolution. And this means that our policy mechanisms will need to start making allowances for those living in vulnerable urban environments. How effectively we can achieve this is also dependent on how closely we're willing to listen to the voices of the marginalized. As we embark on this journey of what will be an exchange of multifarious perspectives, I would like to request you to please keep your phones on silent and your microphones muted unless you're speaking, of course. I would now like to invite Dr. Devanathan Parthasarathy and Mr. Mihir Bhatt to begin this roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you, Prathama. I would like to add my welcome to all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We're very happy to see so many of you for this roundtable, especially the invited speakers, as well as the invited stakeholders, as well as a range of interested participants from whom we hope to gain a lot of knowledge during this roundtable. Let me start with a brief introduction to the Tapestry project, which is hosting this roundtable, and then I'll request Mr. Mihir Bhatt from the All India Disaster Management Institute to introduce the roundtable itself and its objectives and the concept. So the roundtable as an activity and as a methodology is something that we have been using both in this project and in earlier projects. And Mr. Mihir Bhatt is one of those who has innovated the methodology quite a lot and has extensive experience in the use of the roundtable as a way of brainstorming, as a method of knowledge gathering, but also as a way of converting knowledge into policies and strategies. So the Tapestry project explores how transformation may arise from below in marginal environments with high levels of uncertainty. So Tapestry stands for Transformation as Praxis, exploring socially just and transdisciplinary pathways to sustainability in marginal environments, in which we are looking at transformative alliances between different kinds of actors, scientists, local communities, NGOs, state agencies, and others, who are all working together to seek socially just and ecologically sound alternatives based on local understandings of what transformation means or entails. We are working in 3 patches in India and Bangladesh, the Mumbai metropolitan urban region, the Sundarbans transborder region across India and Bangladesh, and Kutch arid dryland region in Western India in Gujarat. In all 3 areas, we are exploring how hybrid alliances and innovative practices can contribute to reimagine sustainable development. And so from what we call as these patches, we hope to learn about how transformation can happen locally and how they can then be scaled up to for wider sustainable change. And our essential conceptual innovation is on studying the transformation, which was a concept that was formally officially used in IPCC AR5 report in terms of pathways to transformation, but it's been extensively used by a number of agencies, scholars, activists, environmentalists, talk about transformation to sustainability. So our idea is to focus on bottom-up change and provide agency to marginalized people in terms of bringing about change to reduce uncertainties and risks. And all the 3 patches that we have chosen have certain qualities in common. One, fragile coastline. Second, shrinking and increasingly exploited mangrove forests. And third, diverse sets of threats to people's livelihoods. Also, not just from climate change, but also due to development processes. And therefore, we are using the method of co-production of knowledge to enhance collaboration between different actors, focusing on islanders in Sundarbans, coastal communities in the Mumbai metropolitan region, and dryland pastoralists in the Kutch region. These communities are exposed to a range of hazards and face key and emerging risks, including floods, droughts, coastal erosion, cyclones and storms, sea level rise, and so on. So the project is organized in a transnational and transdisciplinary consortium across the UK, India, Norway, Bangladesh, and Japan. And the project is led by Professor Laila Mehta from the Institute of Development Studies in Sussex. The key partners are IDS Sussex, the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, IIT Bombay, and Kyoto University in Japan. But we have about 25 to 30 other academic, NGO, civil society, and local community participants and partners in this project. So with this brief introduction, I would like to request Mr. Mihir Bhatt to explain the objectives and purpose and the outline of this roundtable. Before that, I wanted to say that the purpose of this roundtable is not to share the knowledge from the project itself, so that we will have a separate, we hope to have a separate stakeholders roundtable or a workshop later where we hope to see many of you again. The purpose here is to invite speakers who have considerable expertise on understanding different kinds of emerging risks, new kinds of risks from climate change and from other sources to coastal areas. Since the Bombay patch, which we are leading, is focused on coastal zones and coastal cities, we are particularly interested in the new kinds of risks that cities in general and coastal cities are facing, and then invite a range of stakeholders who are here with us today to respond to these perspectives on risks and see how they can be converted into strategies and policies, and what more is required in the form of support, whether it is knowledge or governance or something else. And then we would also respond to the participants who are requested to put in their questions in the chat. And as I said in the beginning, this is also like a methodology for us for gaining knowledge. So we welcome contributions from each of you. Unfortunately, due to the nature of the kind of online workshops which we are having due to the pandemic, we have time restrictions, but please do insert all your questions and we hope to use them and respond to you and get in touch with you and partner with you for this project in the future, even if we don't have time to respond to you immediately in the workshop. Thank you once again. I'll now hand you over to Mr. Mihir Bhatt.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you so much. So let me introduce both the roundtable and the topic that we have today, the old cities, new risk. There is a globalizing instinct, as seen Mowick has seen in climate change science, that tends to favor global scale models and measurements, often at the cost of local cities and small towns, and that repeatedly neglects the lived realities, experiences, and knowledge of people living in urban localities where the effect of climate change, including new risks, manifest themselves more directly, more urgently, and devastatingly. Our Laila Mehta has always underlined that national policies on adaptation are informed by such global assessments, and rightly so, but there is often a limited understanding and appreciation of local urban experiences and knowledges of climate change and its related uncertainties, leading to policies and strategies that are not conducive to local people's own adaptation strategies and actions. We hardly ever know what all a street vendor woman, for example, in Mumbai does to adapt to impact of extended rains and unusual flooding year after year. Focus on risk often becomes static, as if the risks do not change or multiply or evolve or transform across time, space, and human efforts. as is pointed out by Lars Otto in his work on transformation. So these are the two things we are trying to address today in our roundtable. We also want to see that there is an urgent need to bridge these gaps in underlying and perceptions across multiple levels, from the local to national and global, rural to urban, peri-urban, and to seek more co-produced form of knowledge that better reflects the nuances and range of knowledge and experiences of climate change and the new risk about which we will hear very soon. Our Nobuhito Ohute addresses this by using geospatial technology, very global, with very local social science participatory methods. Photo Voices by Shivaji, and there is an exhibition that is put up, and please do visit that, is one way to fill this gap between local, global policy and practice, etc. The illustrations by school children in the Sundarbans on both sides, which is guided by Vinita Damodar, is another way of filling this gap. The virtual exhibition on the history of police, for example, in Warsaw, Mumbai, by Jai and Kate T, is one more way of doing this. And please visit that exhibition as well. The links are in the chat. The round table that we have used for our previous work and this work is one more way to do so, with a wide range of views, sources of information, types of concepts, and references. Individuals and organizations and research disciplines meet, collaborate, collide, and move on, contest each other as well. These roundtables may be face-to-face, as they have been all this time. And for the first time, we are doing it, something which is distant or remote, as this one is being done. So any feedback on the process and ways of innovating would be very useful, and is very welcome. This roundtable in particular aims to reflect on the experiences of co-producing knowledge about climate change and uncertainty in the rapidly urbanizing coastal city of Mumbai, India, that is facing new risks. The insights and findings from this co-production exercise with the very strategic panel members that we have Krishna Ji, who's done an extremely important work on attribution science. Sridhar Ji again is with us. Janak Rajan Ji, NC Ji, Mahua Ji, Hitesh right there, Chandni Ji, all of you will be drawn on in the organization of, as Parthasarthi said, future and final roundtables involving policymakers, bureaucrats, scientists, and activists to create spaces for bridging gaps in understanding of climate change and uncertainty and building pathways to transformation. We aim today to sketch the issues and debates emerging from this roundtable with a very able stakeholder group. It will be led by Timothy Wilcox from UNDRR and joined by local leaders, including Vikas Kohli and a whole range of them. We will be inviting them. They are sector experts, elected officials. They are also part of ongoing other processes of the same kind. And they will reflect on the potential and limitations of such stakeholders' dialogue in bridging different perspectives around old cities and new risks. So thus, we will today aim to do both. One is to shape the ways of doing, roundtable being one, as well as the list of what to do for old cities and new risks. Keeping this in mind, old cities and new risks. With this introduction, I'd like to thank again for opportunity to invite you and to all of you to join us. And on behalf of both of us, Deepak, Sati, and me, I'd like to invite the first panel member, and that is Krishna Chupra, to take the floor and tell us about his work related to old cities and new risks from the point of view of science, Chennai experience, or any other important thing that he has subsequently developed, which will be useful to us. Thank you. Krishna.
Thank you, Mihirji. It's a pleasure to be a part of this roundtable. I will start by sharing my screen, if that's possible. And I have just a few slides, and hopefully it's not going to.
We don't
My
see.
apologies. It appears that my connection dropped. I'm back. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Your voice seems to be breaking, so maybe a good idea to switch off your video and just speak.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's better. It's better. Yes, we can see your screen. It came and disappeared.
Okay. So just to reiterate, the new IPCC report uses terminology that's slightly different from before. There's a phrase called climate impact drivers that's in use to sort of differentiate between hazards which had some seemingly multiple connotations for different people. So what I'm going to focus on is the climate impact drivers that I think are of relevance to coastal cities such as Mumbai. And one of the tables in the new report, different impact drivers that are relevant to cities. So if you look at these columns, they have multiple heat and cold, wet and dry, snow and ice, coastal hazards, etc. So these are mapped against various sectors and geographical areas. If you look at cities, especially coastal cities, sea level, coastal flooding are high impacts and risk relevant drivers. So are severe windstorms, tropical cyclones, etc. So, and in terms of the wet and dry, river floods, heavy precipitation. And these are things that anyway, anybody that's thinking of Mumbai is quite familiar with, at least with the heavy precipitation and flooding. So going into the future, the kinds of things that might be relevant are for coastal cities, especially the warming of the Indian Ocean is going to make better conditions for tropical cyclones. And these tropical cyclones, even though there's no direct evidence from the Indian Ocean, have shown globally, they've shown tendencies to be sort of slowing down in how fast they approach. They kind of tend to stall, and therefore increased rainfall because there's this tropical cyclone that sort of sits or at least moves very slowly. And compounding this is, of course, increased sea level, and these rising sea levels make for higher magnitude and frequency of storm surge. But the thing to also pay attention to in this report is how they talk of compound floods, where it's a combination of a storm surge and extreme rainfall, perhaps a river that's overflowing, and all of this on top of sea level rise. So these compound events, as we see them, are expected to increase in both due to sea level rise and due to increases in heavy precipitation and precipitation intensities associated with tropical cyclones. So the question for me has been whether it is a higher amounts of precipitation or increased sea level or these issues of coastal cities. Is there something that can move forward with the attribution? Do we have evidence of any of this or all of this already happening? So this is where I would like to show some work that we did in following the Chennai flooding event in 2015. And this is a reference to the paper that we wrote. And essentially, it was, as most of you are probably familiar, this was 1 month of heavy, multiple rainfall events culminated in one huge downpour on the 1st of December 2015. So we were looking to see if there's a signature of human influence on this event. We analyzed data going back, and we unfortunately or fortunately, we found that there's no signal of any positive trend in one-day precipitation. Now, if you start looking at whether the whole month got wetter prior to the actual day that it, sort of had this proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, that would be a different analysis to do. So an attribution of human influence is sort of dependent on how we define the event. But if you looked at it as a single day event of nearly 500 millimeter rainfall, then we didn't find that there was any changing risk over time. The other thing we did was to also look at the counterfactuals and see whether going back in time to a pre-industrial climate would have made this event any less probable, and it actually turned out that it didn't. So part of what we explained this was that the Bay of Bengal is probably not warming at the same rate as many other regions of the global ocean. But that's not true for the Arabian Sea, where more of the warming is happening. And this poses the question then as to what's happening in the Arabian Sea. But I'd like to now highlight a few related things, but probably not focused in the Indian region, but these are studies out in the literature where coastal cities of Mumbai-like or similar kind of size and locations have played a part. And one is where we had a hurricane in Harvey, which impacted Houston. Now, in the event attribution science, tropical cyclones are not really something that are easy to attribute because of limitations in the climate, in the sort of models that are used. But one can actually look at what happens to some of the impacts of this. And one of the impacts of this cyclone, Hurricane Harvey, was that there was a huge amount of rainfall around the Houston area. So there have been a bunch of studies looking at how much of this is made worse by climate change. And there's also estimates of what kinds of economic losses is attributable to climate change. And just to give a summary, the intensity of rainfall over the 3-4 days that were considered was probably made about 15 times more than it would have been without climate change, and the probability of such an event itself is about 3 times more because of climate change. But the interesting thing is that if you then go into what is called a fractional attributable risk to climate change, this is about 3/4 of the precipitation is attributable to climate change. And if you look at it as in economic terms, if the total damages are about 90 billion estimated from such an event, if you take the sort of median value, it's about 67 billion and a low end of $30 billion, right? But the other interesting thing is when you do this kind of a bottom-up estimation of damages resulting from this, the number you have is 67 billion with a low end of 30 billion. But some of the top-down economic models actually have total disaster in the US, at least, of only about 21.3 billion. So there's a huge mismatch between even just looking at the economic damages. So there's a way in which attribution science is actually trying to get at this from bottom-up calculations. Another example of where this was done is what happened with Hurricane Sandy. And in this, basically the finding is that the sea level change alone has been attributed to climate change, and that portion of the economic damages that occurred in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area is calculated based on just what you can attribute to sea level rise. And here again, there's a huge fraction of the overall losses of about 60 billion, about 8.1 billion is attributable just to sea level rise. So in the grand scheme of things, what we're talking of is that attribution science is in its early stages, but there are efforts to sort of tease out how much of our risk it has already changed, whether you think of the physical damage or looking at economic losses, etc. So this kind of a study, for example, involves a full hydrodynamic models that are going to look at inundation levels at various levels of flooding due to. So I'll stop here with the key message that attribution science is not something that should be used to project future damages and things at this point, but it is a vital step in understanding what your current risks are, at least, if not going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Can I just come in for a minute?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Krishna. I forgot to mention earlier on that in order to maximize the outcomes from this roundtable, we have not requested all the speakers to speak at length. We've given about 5 to 6 minutes for each speaker, and I'll keep time and let you know if you cross the time. But we have created a folder where we have requested each of the speakers to share material with us, both for general readers and scientific research. And we'll give you the link in the chat, and you can look up more work by these speakers if you want to learn more. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you. And Krishnadi, Sridhar Saab, if you would come in with Bombay IIT background, and we'll hear more about the new risk-related work that's being done in your lab and with your students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihirji, and thank you, Parthasarathy Professor, for having me here. I'll just share the screen. Oops, this is a whiteboard. I don't know my screen. It just shows a whiteboard here.
I think you have to share screen, click on share screen, and then click on window.
It doesn't, it only shows whiteboard and files, that's all. Maybe I do have the rights, or I don't know.
You do. You can also click on advanced and then content. No, it should be. See, once you open it, I think it will share. It will show it. It's showing it for me, the other screens, once I open it. Nathan, if you're there, can you just check if he has rights? Should be having.
Yes, participants do have rights to share their screen. I'm going to send you an email for you to send me your slides to, and then I can share them for you.
Okay, yeah, maybe that's because I am unable to see the. I'm not able to see my. Okay, maybe this. Well, let me just try this.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay, I see.
Okay.
I had to go on files and it. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's worked out well. Thanks.
Okay, so quickly, maybe I'll stick to the 5-minute time limit that has been given. So thank you once again. So today I'm going to just talk about the risks and impacts to the coastal cities due to a changing dynamics of the North Indian Ocean and in a warming scenario. That is the title of the talk. So without further ado, I'll just get into the crux of the problem. So as Professor Krishna already said, the IPCC report has indicated that the ocean and atmosphere globally are showing a warming trend compared to the past few decades. So this particular slide is from the IPCC. So the particular picture is from the IPCC report. But if you kind of zoom in, then you will see that there is a regional warming. Some places are warming more than the other. And it has also been mentioned that the Indian Ocean is going to warm at a slightly faster rate than the other ocean basins. And even in the Indian Ocean, there is going to be much more regional warming, wherein you have the West Indian Ocean and the East Indian Ocean. So in the figure on the right-hand side, I'm showing one of the snapshots from one of the paper by Roxy and others, which was published in BAMS. And there, if you see, there is a warm pool, which has been traditionally or historically been present in the East Indian Ocean, which is showing a warming trend starting from the 1900s.
Sridhar, your slide is not moving.
Okay, is it moving now?
No.
I'm changing here. Okay, let me.
Okay. Yeah, now it's moved.
Okay, so maybe I will just try the PPT version in case it's.
Okay.
Is this better? Is it moving now?
No, no, now it's got sort of distorted.
Okay, so maybe I have to. Is it okay now? This particular slide.
Now, yeah, now you can see it. Yes.
Okay, so maybe I'll just stick to. I'll not go to the view mode. I'll just stick here.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is what I was saying, that the Indian Ocean is showing a warming pattern where the Arabian Sea, which is the West Indian Ocean, where the Arabian Sea region exists, that is warming at a much more faster rate compared to the Bay of Bengal. And this is something that has been known for a while now. So the research study that we kind of try to perceive here was what is this going to bring in a dynamic sense. So the Arabian Sea dynamics, how is it going to change in a warming scenario? And that this particular study we had, it was done with a group of people, and it has been published in Journal of Physical Oceanography 2020. And I have shared the paper in the folder that was sent to me. So if you look, so I'll just quickly explain what is going on here in this slide. So what we are trying to see is that RCP 8.5 is the future scenario, which is the business as usual, where you're not cutting down any greenhouse emission. So if you consider that the warming is going to continue at the same trend as right now, and compared to the historical pattern, and if you subtract the two, then if you see that the E minus P, which is the evaporation minus precipitation, is showing a negative anomaly, which means that the precipitation is going to increase. So that means there is going to be more fresh water, which is going to increase the stratification. So the stratification of the Arabian Sea is going to show an increasing trend where you have fresh water on the top and maybe saline water on the bottom. So that way the stratification is going to increase. And then if you look at the net heat flux, which is the heat content which is coming from the solar radiation and the long wave, short wave, as well as the latent heat. So that is showing a negative trend in the future, which means that the latent heat is going to increase. So the moisture availability is going to be more. And if you look at the wind patterns, the winds are also going to show a increasing trend. So the winds are going to strengthen as we go into the futuristic scenario, and the strengthening winds are actually the major reason which will cause warming in the Arabian Sea, because the winds, as they strengthen, then they have the ability to produce downwelling and upwelling phenomenon, which is going to actually create gyres of cyclonic and anticyclonic eddies, which will actually create cold and warm pools in a spatially distributed region. So the whole crux of this particular slide is that the stratification is going to increase and the winds are going to increase as well. So if you actually assume that the stratification is going to increase, then the immediate um, thing that comes to the mind is that, so if it is more stratified, the mixing is going to reduce. That is what it probably hints at. But what we found out when we did a modeling, downscaled modeling approach between the RCP 8.5 futuristic trend winds and the warming, and comparing it with the historical data, we found out that in the Arabian Sea, that is not going to happen. So the warming is not going to actually reduce the mixed layer depth. It is going, and there are two distinct regions in the Arabian Sea where you have the upper polygon, which is the northern Arabian Sea, and the lower polygon, which is the central and the South Arabian Sea. So if you see in the Arabian Sea, in the northern region of the Arabian Sea, the mixed layer depth is actually not going to increase. Not going to change. It's either going to it's not going to become shallow because of the stratification. It is actually going to be the same as the historical MLD, or it may even increase slightly. Whereas in the southern Arabian Sea, it is going to reduce. So the mixed layer depths in the Arabian Sea are going to show a discrete patterns in a regional sense as well. And one of the reasons for that is because even though you are putting in more you are actually warming the upper layer of the ocean in the Arabian Sea, but the strong winds that are coming in, they are going to actually create more eddies, and that is going to actually increase the mixed layer depth. So this is the anticipated MLD because of the stratification effect, but because of the kinetic energy that is being produced due to the stronger winds, you are going to see that in some regions the MLD is not going to change, whereas in some regions the MLD is going to change. So the variability in the mixing dynamics is going to be very high in the Arabian Sea region, and that is going to actually trigger a lot of impact on a variable scale for different regions along the West Coast. So then in a separate study, what we did was we proposed a method to model the regional dynamics in the Arabian Sea in a changing climate, where we actually looked at what are the fluxes. So buoyancy is the stratification effect, shear production is the wind effect. So if you kind of look at the two, then in which regions you are actually going to have the effect of both of these stratification and wind effects, and in which regions and which seasons you're only going to have the buoyancy effect or the stratification effect. And based on that, we have proposed a method. But the major, the important aspect of the slide is that it kind of hints or it kind of indicates that the parametric mixing schemes that are present in the global models or the coupled ocean atmospheric models, they need to go through a rapid or a rigorous change, or because they should be able to capture these regional differences that are happening in the Arabian Sea, because most of the mixing schemes actually underrepresent the mixing and the moisture transport in the atmosphere because of the underrepresentation of the mixing. And that is going to be a key issue, because when in the future, even right now, when we expect some rainfall, let us say 100 mm, we get almost like 4 times more than that, like 400 or 500 mm. So we are unable to actually represent the mixing of the ocean and associated moisture transport accurately in these models. And that is going to actually become even more serious as we go into a changing climate, especially in the Arabian Sea. So in conclusion, what I would like to say is that the non-uniform surface warming patterns and the mixed layer depth behavior in the Arabian Sea is likely to make this a tricky basin, considering the future warming scenarios. And normally the Arabian Sea has a deeper mixed layer depth, but there is a consensus from some of the studies, including ours, that the central and the South Arabian Sea can exhibit shallow mixed layer depth due to the ocean warming. However, the Northern Arabian Sea may still maintain a deeper MLD. So how to model these differences in the regional sense, and how to actually get the moisture drag correctly, especially during the monsoon season, when the monsoon low level jet comes in from the Somalian coast to the west coast of India. So entire west coast of India could possibly impacted due to some changing dynamics. So there is a risk and impacts which we are already seeing in terms of erratic monsoon, as well as the cyclones, which for the past 3 years we have seen cyclones on the west coast of India, one hitting and two passing by, but still these were not common. So the changing dynamics in the Arabian Sea is going to create should be taken into account by a skilled parametric scheme moving ahead into the future. So with that, I will stop, and I will take up any questions later on whenever the discussion opens up. Thank you so much, and sorry about the presentation issues.
Thank you. Both points about the regional dynamics across the sea, first between the two seas and also within the same sea. It's very important to take it further. We will now request Janakarajan. If you are ready, we can come. Welcome. And Partha, if you will introduce Janakarajan, please.
Sorry. Thank you, Professor Parthasarathy and Professor Mehir Bhatt, for this opportunity. And I'm going to avoid PowerPoints because it's going to take more time. So I'm going to really touch upon the issues which are not necessarily because of the climate change. In fact, the focus of the roundtable is that what are the key emerging risks to coastal cities and urban regions from anthropogenic and climate change related factors. But I'm saying, yes, climate change related factors are there, okay, it's going to really aggravate the problem, but there are existing risks, emerging risks, and these risks are becoming more bigger and bigger and going to become, create more uncertainties. So I'm really going to, touch upon those issues, and I'm basically going to talk about 3 major issues. One is about the, in the coastal cities, particularly, I'm going to talk up in the context of Chennai. The air pollution is said to be the 4th deadliest threat, and we all know that the air pollution is caused primarily by intense human activities. It's happening already, and which require increasing use of solid and liquid fuels, namely coal and petroleum products, for energy generation and transportation of goods and people. So that is really causing a big problem, and that is really increasing and increasing day by day. And we have not made any efforts to check that. But for more and more intense economic activities, coupled with the extremely poor waste management practices. I mean, this is again, these are all existing and we are experiencing. And the poor waste management practices in the context of solid waste, liquid waste, electrical and electronic waste, biomedical waste, and so on, are really contributing factors for the urban air pollution, which poses a huge risk for survival, individually and collectively in the whole planet. And of course, these are going to really aggravate the climate change issues and global warming issues. But the available statistics and studies show that even heavy metals such as mercury, manganese, nickel, and silica are found in the air in Chennai. And the northern part of Chennai, where a dozen coal-based thermal power plants are located, contributes to serious air pollution. And most parts of North Chennai is reported to be unlivable. The pollution load in the air has made disconnects. It has made even disconnects within the city between North and South Chennai, basically because the North Chennai is more heavily polluted and even the water is polluted. Mercury is found in the surface water, groundwater, seawater, soil, and in the air. As we are all aware, the presence of heavy metals in the air causes serious health problems, more so respiratory and neuro-related diseases. The Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board, as well as other studies, confirm that the PM 2.5 at various levels are present, causing reduction in the lungs capacity of the people. And you will see that most people in North Chennai have got very serious lung-related issues and lung-related concerns. And increasing vehicular traffic, causing a heavy concentration of carbon monoxide and CO2, contributes to serious air pollution and of course to greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere. Now, the key issue that I would like to stress upon here is that these issues are remaining. These are there, to what extent these are due to climate change is the question of debate, but these are the issues which have been existing and which are going to increase in the days to come. How are we going to handle this issue? And these are the issues which is really going to cause a very, very serious tragedies for people to human tragedies. Now the second issue, which is somewhat related, is the urban heat. The air pollution not only contributes to health problems but also contributes to urban heat. The urban heat and urban heat islands are the emerging serious risks which can be fatal as temperature rises. Of course, these climate change, global warming issues are really going to aggravate this problem. Why urban heat is increasing and why is it a big risk? On the one hand, there is a rapid increase in population and increasing population density. And at the same time, there is a very high level of increase in the high intense economic activities, which requires, of course, energy generation, and also you need lots of high concentration of high-rise concrete structures. All these are contributing. On the other hand, not only that the cities are losing urban space rapidly for any vegetation, but most importantly, losing urban rivers, urban water bodies. Chennai city is really unique in the country, having 3 urban rivers and one man-made canal called Buckingham Canal. There's 17 nullas and plus numerous lakes. The city has lost lakes and nullas, and 3 urban rivers are shrunk and are currently merely sewage carriers. Most importantly, the urban wetland called Pallikarna marshland, an ecological treasure, I would call it an ecological treasure, is lost. This marshland is actually a freshwater swamp, which was originally connected to 31 lakes upstream, was an extensive low-lying area covered by a mosaic of aquatic grass species, scrub, marsh, and waterlogged depressions. Amazingly, it has a catchment area for 235 square kilometers. It receives an annual rainfall of 1,300 millimeters. Originally, this marshland was spread over an area of 50 square kilometers, now poses a very pathetic look as a dump yard for cities' solid waste generation and for thousands of tons every day. Encroached for buildings, numerous concrete structures, roads and flyovers. Hardly one-tenth of the marshland remains now, that too filled with all kinds of waste and sewage. The net result, urban heat and persisting urban heat islands. Basically, the point that I'm trying to convey here is that we have lost all the carbon sinks, and we have lost all the urban rivers and the flood carriers, and naturally your threat which might be caused due to climate change is now increasing. So that is the second issue which we wanted to emphasize. And thirdly, very important, the coastal vulnerability and emerging risks. Chennai is losing inland and coastline wetlands, mangroves, estuaries, creeks, and sand dunes, resulting in coastal erosion, seawater intrusion, coastal flooding, sea level rise, contributing to loss of land. These are already there, existing. To what extent these are due to global warming induced climate change, I don't know, I cannot say. But these are existing, been there for quite some time. Already, you will see that coastal erosion is a serious problem, and the sea is advanced by at least a kilometer in North Chennai. The available studies show that Chennai city is going to be very badly hit by sea level rise, and the sea is expected to advance by several kilometers inland, and many islets may be created in the sea. There are studies which indicate this. Now, what is needed? How are you going to handle all these problems is a big question. Now, this is where I would like to really suggest that there is a greater need for formulating a policy framework and carrying out immediate action program for examining and documenting the increasing urban risks and the vulnerability assessments. See, there are policies, but then there's a huge gap between policy and action. So you really have to make policy which are implementable, and the policies which are actually put into practice and bridge the gap. And secondly, there is a need to have a rethink on the unchecked urban expansion and haphazard unscientific land use and land use planning. So the land use planning is the biggest culprit. There has been a sort of the efforts to make a scientific urban land use planning, but unfortunately many efforts have been made, but then still the all urban land planning exercises are development centric and not at all really looking at what might happen if the land use planning is blind. Urban floods poses a serious threat, and it is going to be a much bigger concern in future. In order to address this issue, all urban rivers and nullas, coastal and inland wetlands, coastal estuaries and brackish water lakes need to be retrieved and rejuvenated. After all these water bodies and water courses are flood carriers, without which Chennai city and all other cities are bound to really suffer. Krishna in his presentation talked about the 2015 flood, which actually cost 700 lives, and we lost property worth 20,000 crores. But in my view, yes, to a great extent, this flood might have been caused due to climate change, but it could have been easily mitigated had you preserved all the water bodies around Chennai. There are about 4,000 water bodies around Chennai, and with the 3 city rivers are shrunk, if they are rejuvenated, if they are deepened and the gravity is maintained, easily the flood in 2015 could have been mitigated. And you will see that 2015 flood was declared as the flood of the century, and 2016 was declared the drought of the century. Why? Because we could not save any water. And 470 millimeters of rainfall in one day in 24 hours caused such a huge flood because we could not save any water. All the water bodies in the upstream were completely silted up, and very little water could be saved, and all the water really flowed downstream from the upstream and flew towards the sea, and naturally on the way the city got flooded. So the point that I'm trying to make is that it is possible to mitigate floods, provided you really take care of your ecosystems. And we give very little attention to ecosystems, and all our attentions are diverted towards growth and development. That is the biggest issue. The increasing threat of urban floods is also closely associated with urban planning, as I said, and also opposite land use policy is to followed by the urban planning authorities in all major cities in the country. But when floods occur, the bureaucrats have the tendency to hide behind climate change, that, oh, it is because of climate change. But I tell you, this attitude has to change. In particular, the hitherto master plans for city expansion followed a blind path of land use policy, in which utmost importance was given only to the land use for growth and development as the focus. This attitude has to change completely. There is an urgent need for an integrated approach of integrating droughts and floods. The intensity of droughts and intensity of floods are going to increase in the days to come, but then you really have to have an integrated approach. Taking care of a drought would mean taking care of flood. Take care of all your water body during the droughts, and so that you are reduce the fury and reduce the intensity of the flood during the flood seasons. The emerging climate scenario, more so after the publication of the IPCC Assessment Report 6, Working Group 1, is more threatening, as earlier speakers have said, which calls for policies and implementation to address climate emergency conditions. This is particularly important for the coastal cities where the least importance is given to the maintenance of coastal wetlands, estuaries, sand dunes, mangroves, and marshlands. The coastal regulation zone is so grossly diluted and violated. What care is taken for that? Unless we really take care of the coastal regulation zone seriously, unless the coastal water bodies and the coastal, wetlands are maintained, this is going to become a serious issue for us. And there is an urgent need for the urban planning authority to follow the climate and ecosystem-centric land use policy, which is extremely important. Mainstream urban climate resilience, urban climate mitigation, and climate adaptation policies are extremely necessary and important, but nobody seems to taking care of this seriously. And friends, I must tell you, data collection is very important. Data analysis is very important. Most importantly, data management, and is the biggest shortcoming. Do we really have? Do we really collect a scientific database on all this? Do we have a database on the gravity? Do you have database on the streams? Do you have database on the hydrological models for which the data is used? And people are using the data, assuming data, and create models, but that is not going to give us scientific results. People do assume a lot of things because we don't have the scientific database. It's extremely important for us to collect the scientific data and also scientific data management. This is very, very important. Lastly, we are now talking about the multi-stakeholder engagement from below. Now, we have a case of the multi-stakeholders engagement from below, but these are basically reflected in emergence of social movements. The case of Ennur fisher folks, which is part of North Chennai, is revolting against the pollution. Is really contributed a big change. There are dozens of, at least a dozen coal-based thermal power plants in North Chennai, and these have created huge problems for people there, particularly for the fisher folks, and they created a big social movement. And this social movement was supported by media, NGOs, social and environmental and academic activists, and government finally had to yield. Now they are making efforts to really rejuvenate the water bodies in North Chennai. So these are some of the issues that I thought I would make. And the essence of my presentation is that, look, yes, definitely climate change is a problem, and global warming, we are living in the warming world, but the vulnerabilities, risks are uncertainties already there. And this is going to go up tremendously, may get aggravated because of the climate change issues. But what measures have we taken so far? What measures are we taking? And what measures are we going to really take in terms of preserving the coastal ecosystems and in changing the attitude of the urban land use planners? Thank you.
Thank you, Janakrathanji, and I'm sorry I didn't introduce you. Janakrathanji is with MIDS in Chennai and has done a lot of work on water, both from development perspective and disaster perspective. We have limited time and speaker and stakeholders, so we'll quickly move to our next speaker. And I'm going to request Mahuaji from IIT Roorkee. She's been very active in urban planning, urban design, as well as other design solutions to urban issues and climate issues. Currently, she is also a very important member in the leading light of the World Congress on Disaster Management, looking after urban issues and other aspects there. So, Mawati, if you would kindly make your presentation as briefly and succinctly if you can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mihirji, and thank you, Professor Parthasarathy. I'm really happy. Good evening, all the participants. Let me share my screen. So I'm also very much thankful to Professor Janak Rajan because that has given a very good background. What I am going to discuss with you people. Nature-based solution for coastal urban risk reduction. That's the topic which I chose to deliberate today. Coastal areas, already this discussion has come up. Coastal areas are facing this erosion, wave, storm surge, sea level rise. Many of these we are now equating with the climate change. But urban complexities are also rising due to the anthropogenic interventions, heat island, flood, water scarcity, air pollution, blue-green loss. So my primary discussion will be how more logically with rational we can go for the nature-based solution integration, because it's not only habitat, but also the infrastructure system is really collapsing. Lots of investment we are having. So today I will primarily discuss this, how we are approaching towards this nature-based solutions. We have tried to understand this nexus between energy and these natural elements and the safety. Critical ecologically stressed areas and potential intervention zones, because we come from the implementation side. So we have tried to understand how best we can bring together. And for that, STEAM AI framework has been developed. GeoSM-NATI toolbox is one of the major vertical of that framework. I will discuss that. Briefly, we will discuss also blue-green infrastructure solution basket and stakeholders participation, how we can really integrate. So this is the particular framework, strategic ecosystem monitoring, assessment, and blue-green infrastructure implementation-based resilience framework that we have. I'm thankful DST has supported us for this particular project, where we have been able to come up with an interesting process, GeoSM-NATI toolbox, we are calling it. It's not only for mapping the ecologically stressed areas and the risk, but also where we can implement. And after this implementation potential, those areas are being mapped, we are not satisfied because that doesn't solve the problem. Problem is being solved that even after you develop the solution basket, local level interaction and implementation is completely different thing. So these are the things where we have been able to understand again and again, stakeholders should come in and the implementation should go through very well laid out projectization. And once you got it implemented, this blue-green infrastructure, and you have nicely gone for a good networking process also as a very good adaptation and mitigation tool for resilience. But then also continuously you have to go for this monitoring, assessment, and you have to get the feedback. So that's the way our framework is there. I'm just bringing the GeoSM-NATI toolbox that is based on the geospatial data. Just now, Dr. Janakarajan was talking about the data. Yes, we have tried to understand that getting data is very difficult. So we try to get the emerging tools and technology into use. So spatio-temporal data that has been captured and the data has been analyzed, index-based, NDVI, NDWI, and NDBI. Here you can see that again the coincidence, we have picked up the Chennai city for this geosemnati toolbox, where we have tried to understand geospatial process data and also using it for the solution side. So this is after going through the overlaying matrix of all those NDVI, NDWI, and NDBI, then we have been able to create this decadal image, and you can see that where Chennai was in 90s and where we are in 2020. So we have been able to capture that change also in terms of square kilometer area change, the trend. I'm not saying it's a very accurate to the decimal point, but to the greatest extent, whatever is possible in the spatial one. And this is a very working day information on the basis of which we can take lots of planning decisions. And after that, we have gone for again further improvement into our information and analysis overlay. And there we brought the buildings and also the streets layout to understand actually what is happening in the built-up vegetation and water body and road. So more you make it, more information you bring in, definitely you will get a more accurate information. But for that, you have to go for access the good resolution of data. And for only one thing we are showing here, that is the land surface temperature, which gives us a very good idea about the UHI formation. So based on this type of different overlay information for the groundwater, for the air pollution, for the urban flooding DEM level, we have been able to develop not only this urban heat island related risk map, but also for the groundwater, for the air pollution, and also for the urban flooding risk. Once we map the risk, then we have been also able to understand that we have to also identify the potential areas. And this geosemnati toolbox is giving us exactly that. I don't have any slide on that, but we have been able to also identify those areas where we can intervene, at least academically or from the lab. You can identify, okay, these are the areas where you can intervene. But when you go to the ground, it depends on who owns the land, whether it is a public, private, depending on many other aspects, you can actually see whether that particular area is accessible, will be able to take care of this blue-green infrastructure. Those are the things. Now we come for the solution basket, as I was talking about. For this urban complexities, urban heat island, urban flooding, these are some of the very commonly discussed blue-green elements, which we can identify appropriate areas, permeable pavement, rain garden, bioswale, live well, injection well, detention pond, retention tank, channel migration zone, constructed wetland. So there are so many, it's not exhaustive, there are much more there. So this solution basket, only having the solution basket, again, we understood after having discussion with community, is not going to solve the problem. So first we have tried to understand the trend, then we have tried to understand the risk, then we have tried to understand where we can intervene with the blue-green infrastructure or nature-based solution, and accordingly this solution basket has been created. And we have also been able to create this coastal area related basket, life fence and creep wall, pocket beach, because until and unless we take care of this long length of coast, you cannot really ensure the resilience of the habitat and also the infrastructure which you are investing on. So for that, many marsh, just now you have heard about the marsh breakwater, marsh nourishment is also there, constructed marsh. Then reef, mangroves, maritime forest, beach nourishment, dune restoration. So there are many different, this type of solutions which have been identified and been used. So
sorry to interrupt, but we were running short of time. So if you
I am at the end. So only 2 points I would like to bring in front of the audience, that two aspects of what we can really offer from our lab immediately towards the Tapestry initiative, that we can go for this particular geosimilarity toolbox training, and we can also go for this this solution basket, and we can have the participatory discussion with the community for going for the solution. So that community engagement we can be interested with. With this, I would like to say thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, Marwaji. And this both this scanner tool and its possible use in various coastal cities, but also beyond. It's very useful, and both training related to that and further exploration and updating of that would be very useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If we can go to NC, please, from IIT Bombay, and a brief as you can, because we have such good stakeholders and we do want to also use time to for their input.
My
please.
slides are there.
Your slides can be seen. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So thank you, Tapestry Project, Mihir and Partha, for this opportunity. And the presentation basically argues for both a macro and micro understanding of floods. And I will mostly focus on the need for a local level assessment of risks. And I'm very thankful to all my presenters before me, because I'll be following many of that. And especially the kind of, the importance of the local is what I'll be bringing in. And this comes out of, almost four years of our work in a context in Kerala, in the Alleppey municipality and the kind of wetland region of Vembanad, surrounding that. And we started with sanitation planning for, rejuvenation of the canals, but then we moved on to flood and adaptive management of flood from the 2018, incident that followed. So the main objective was to develop a local pool of resources, a local pool of expertise who can actually do this, technical kind of planning, and also assist the local governance, because, thanks to the kind of decentralization efforts that are going on in Kerala, I think municipalities and panchayats, have budget and they can do their own planning. So especially in the wetland region, we were, kind of arguing for how this local level plans have to be much more, risk-based and, risk planning based. And, so that's the kind of intro. And we also have an elected representative from Alleppey municipality who will later pitch in during the stakeholder consultation, Mr. Prem Radhakrishnan. I'm thankful to him also. So basically, why coastal cities in Kerala need a basin level understanding. Then our protocol for assessing floods and integrating risk planning to local governance. And then at the end, differential vulnerability and coping by various groups. This is the Cochin city, and we can see the kind of built-up area growth, which is more dramatic here. In 1990, all these yellow areas were agricultural lands, and this is this comes at the mouth of the delta of 5 rivers, the Cochin city. So it's very dangerous to kind of develop these wetlands into such built-up areas. And partly Cochin city escapes because it's part of the larger wetland ecosystem. Kerala in general, there are the highlands which rise about 2,800 meters above sea level, the Western Ghats. Then there are the rolling midlands, and then the coastal strip, which is a narrow strip of land. 10% of this actually carries, 65% of the population and all major towns. So these towns have to be situated within that. And there are, small 44 rivers coming from the Western Ghats. And we are actually concentrating on this area, which is the Vembanad Lake, where I think Cochin has an outlet, and the Alleppey town is here. 5 major, river basins drain into this wetland called Webinar. And this is actually below sea level, and the cities are at the mean sea level. So that means, there is a large basin which can actually accommodate these waters. I think, that's actually saving these cities in a way. In 2018 floods, I think this is the kind of inundation that happened, and 2.4 lakh people had to be evacuated from this wetland system. And so this is another view. This is where the Alleppey town is, and these are all, the lake converted into paddy fields, which doesn't accommodate water to come in. So that's one of the major problems that are coming also at the basin level. Coming to the protocol of risk assessment, we have this risk as hazard and exposure, vulnerability, and coping capacity. And to understand this, we have actually divided that into the components, the definitions, the factors affecting this, and the assessment methods. So we use basically GIS, household survey, secondary data for all this: hazard, exposure, and vulnerability, both biophysical and socioeconomic vulnerability. And then we looked at the kind of coping capacity also. So these are the local factors contributing to urban floods, which all of you know, which is a combination of population density, blocks in drainage, and which actually then the drainage impact area is assessed. So this is what we did for the Alleppey one. Out of the 52 wards, we selected 6 of them which are hotspots, and then identified the canals, the flood inundation area, and the houses actually affected by this. And one of the major reasons was this was originally a canal which actually turned into a drain, and now the drain is also getting into a bottleneck which doesn't allow water to flow. I think this is a very common thing. And the second and major reason is a lack of solid waste management, and this dumping actually impedes the flow in a major way. And so we argue that there is a need for both this sanitation management, and which will then kind of impact on floods also. Because in 4 years we tried to work on canal rejuvenation and sanitation planning, which did not work. But in the last storm surge in May, I think many houses got affected. So when this waste actually came into the houses, it now becomes a felt activity. So I think now we have given them the municipality a report to kind of go forward. And I'll end with the argument of differential vulnerability, which is in the Webinar region. So this is the kind of spatial vulnerability assessment that we have done, looking at flood levels, looking at landforms, land typology. And so we found that there's a spatial vulnerability and a social vulnerability also. For example, these are very marginal spaces in the sense of these are islands within which are not connected. And then we found that very marginal kind of groups actually live there also, and they are denied all these kinds of development requirements also. And it is closely related to the kind of the spatiality and sociality are closely related. And coming to the adaptation, these are the way in which the poor households actually adapt. They kind of raise their houses. These are planks that are being made, and there are hanging toilets. And so we say living with floods, but these are very and then at one point many people are kind of abandoning their homes also and migrating to other places. And these are adaptation for and actually coping of the better sections of the people, where they raise the plinth level, and even they keep the lower floor kind of empty for the floods to come in. So these are the kind of differential adaptations of people also into it. So I think the conclusions are that, one, there is a need for basin level understanding, which actually kind of brought us into how even Cochin city is saved by the kind of floods in the larger, Vembanad region, and why these two have to be kind of planned together. Second is integrating risk planning at local governance level, because the panchayats have to be kind of, trained to kind of look at even the kind of local development planning into this. And third, especially with the Tapestry project, we talk of transformation. And definitely there is a kind of differential vulnerability which has to be factored into planning. So those are my three arguments that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, NCG. Very useful points about planning, decentralized and local, but also differential vulnerability that you pointed out. Hitesh Waiter, the director at NIUA, had some personal emergency, so he has got an offer his apology. He'll be with us next time when we have similar gathering. I'd like to ask last panel member, and Chandni ji, she's working with IIHS in Bangalore and has done a lot of work on adaptation, both in India but abroad as well, Southeast Asia, South Asia. I'd like to request Chandni, please come.
Thank you so much, Mihirji. I'll just share my screen. I hope it's visible. All right, so I think a lot of the speakers, I mean, it's really been a rich set of evidence presented from many cities. And I'd really like to bring back the people in the cities. So far, we've been talking about cities as ecological or socio-ecological systems, but I'd really like to focus on who the people are and which people are most at risk in cities. So there are two bits of work I'd like to present. One is from Bangalore, where we had a long-term 5-year-long study looking at differential vulnerability and adaptation. And although Bangalore isn't a coastal city, I think it shares several risks that you also see in our coastal cities. So a lot of informality, inequality, precarious livelihoods, and then recurrent localized flooding and rainfall extremes. So in Bangalore, what we did is we were looking at how, who are the people who are most vulnerable to climatic risks. And what we found is that people living in informal settlements, these kinds of blue tent settlements that you see in the picture, are the ones who both have very low capacities to adapt, but are also entering very precarious livelihoods, because of which they are exposed to cycles of less water availability, but then also cycles of localized flooding. And these, so what we did is try to explore what's happening, who are these people, where are they coming from? And the main argument that we found looking at migrant households is that people who move from rural areas to urban areas using migration as a coping or a risk management strategy, often these migrants carry risks with them from rural areas to urban areas. And although migration is seen as a strategy to manage their risk better, what happens is when they move from climate sensitive sectors like agriculture or livestock rearing in the rural, which at least in this case of Bangalore, people who are moving from drought prone areas in North Karnataka, they leave one set of risks in the rural and then they enter a new set of risks that often are unfamiliar when they come to the urban. So this is what we've called shifting risks. People, when they move from rural to urban areas, the risk portfolio changes, and therefore the strategies that they've honed over generations and over their own lives to deal with risk, that too changes. And what doesn't change is the socioeconomic vulnerabilities that they have because of the caste they belong to, the gender perhaps, the kind of household structures or the livelihoods that they enter. So you've got this changing risk space, but the the capacities and the vulnerabilities that they hold, they remain the same. So you can see that there's a tension in that. And that is why in the vulnerability assessments that we did at a ward level in Bangalore, we found that migrants, especially temporary and short-term migrants, are the most vulnerable to climatic risks. And in this case, we were looking at drought, water scarcity, and flooding in Bangalore. The second example I'd like to give is of Chennai, where we've again been doing a lot of work, and several speakers spoke, from decades of experience really in Chennai. I would like to talk about planned relocation activities that are taking place in Chennai, which started from the tsunami but have continued in the 2015 floods and the recurrent cyclones that keep taking place on the coast. So on the face of it, planned relocation is a way to shift risk. Again, you move people out of very risk-prone regions at the coast or even along Chennai's riverbanks, which are flood-prone. And the argument is that you're moving people out of risk, and so you're reducing the exposure to these risks. But what we've seen is that, and other scholars have also argued that what is happening in these planned relocation activities by the state, but also with funding from the big banks, is that people are being moved from one flood-prone area to another. So these relocation sites are often built on wetlands. Professor Janakarajan mentioned Pallikarnai Marsh in Chennai, and a lot of housing has come up in and around these wetlands, which again lead to a shifting of risk, but also compounding of risk. And so people are, first of all, uprooted from their social networks, their livelihoods, their kinship networks, and then they are put into these areas which are additionally risk prone. So this has led to a compounding of events, and really a complete shift in how people are having to deal with these new risks. Finally, I'd just like to, I'll skip this. All right, I'll just quickly say I think as you were introducing the Tapestry project, what really struck me is this whole idea of how does risk management, adaptation in coastal cities get constructed from the above and the below, right? And what we found in this project called Recovery with Dignity, and I can share the link to the project with a lot of material that we've collected over the past 3 years, is that from the above, the state and other actors, humanitarian actors, tend to talk of risk management in terms of tangible interventions, building houses, providing livelihoods. But when you talk to people on the ground, and we conducted these participatory group discussions with communities where we said, what does recovery mean to you? It's often longer term, it's not short term, it's not always tangible, it's longer term, and it's multi-pronged. So yes, the house plays an important role, and education and livelihoods, but there are also natural resources, commons in the villages and urban settlements. People talk about trees, people talk about communal spaces like temples and the cricket ground in the village and things like that. And so I think there's a need for us to understand how these two frames of recovery, one that is top down and very static and aggregate and tangible, and one that is bottom up, which is much more multi-pronged, but also long-term, has to be understood. So I'll stop there, and I've really kept it short because I know you're running out of time. Thanks so much. But I can share links to some of our work later. Yeah.
Kamini, this is absolutely, thanks for the timing, and also very fascinating. Shifting risk and shifting vulnerabilities. And very important point as far as the new risks are concerned in old cities. So with this, we end the panel part, and I can request you, the stakeholder response to what is presented to us, if you could lead that.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the speakers. That was a very rich set of insights, recommendations, and principles for us to take forward our discussions on new risks and resilience. We have invited a few stakeholders, a very diverse set of stakeholders from communities, participants to local governance officials, but also people working with regional, national, and international organizations. So we'd like to start with Tim Wilcox, who's from the Office of the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Office. Thank you very much for agreeing to be part of our roundtable. So Tim, if you can start with a response, very brief response. We would request about 2 to 3 minutes for each of the stakeholders because we have already exceeded time, but it's been very fascinating.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I'll speak as quickly as I can, just for some key points. But look, thanks very much, everyone, and thank you to our esteemed and honoured organisers and panellists today. I mean, to be honest, the issues and experiences and opportunities raised were extremely useful and interesting and fascinating. I won't spend time reinforcing the messages of the negative effects of climate change because our colleagues have already done that extremely well. But just a few points. I mean, as we've heard from others, we really do need to adopt a comprehensive and inclusive approach to risk assessments, as we've heard. And just as importantly, these assessments need to be informed, I think, by accurate data, as we've heard from a couple of speakers. But just as importantly, all relevant parts of society, such as private sector, also need access to this risk data and information in a format that is easily understood and that can be used by them. There's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of images and things on websites and in publications, but it's not always easily accessible or easily understood by lay people. So if we can make that as accessible as possible, I think that will help build the resilience. But also, to assist urban resiliency, earlier this year, UNDRR launched its Making Cities Resilient initiative, which is where cities sign up and commit to reducing risk and building resilience. And essentially the campaign is, I think, built around 3 stages. Resilience roadmap that basically guides cities on how to improve resilience over time. And cities can sign up to the campaign and they make commitments to demonstrate progress. Basically the goal is to get cities to develop a local DRR strategy and mainstream their systems and with proper monitoring and evaluation mechanisms, to make sure that resilience is achieved. But more importantly, the cities and local authorities are encouraged to be inclusive as possible with vulnerable groups, with private sector included in their planning. And in fact, I think it was Dr. Mihir at the beginning mentioned that in his opening remarks that assessments need to be inclusive, as well as multi-sectoral in their approach and to, examine all hazards, not just climate-related ones or the more traditional approaches that people know about. And in fact, COVID-19 has really highlighted very well what happens when we ignore risks, that are overlapping and result in cascading and compounding effects. I mean, we're seeing countries dealing with a cyclone and a pandemic at the same time, which is kind of unprecedented really in many ways. But my last point is to help kind of progress things forward in the region. UNDRR is in the process of finalizing its new Asia Pacific Action Plan for implementation of the Sendai framework from 2021 to 2024. And essentially this new action plan aims to accelerate Asia Pacific's transformation to risk-informed development. In other words, to increase investment in prevention and risk reduction and anticipatory approaches to enhance resilience. And the fact that there is no vaccine against climate change makes an even stronger case for greater investment in DRR and adaptation to climate change, particularly for developing countries. And I'm happy to say that the Zero Draft Plan anyway, we're finalizing it, but the Zero Draft Plan has included priorities seeking to improve cities' understanding of risk and enhance their commitment to local disaster and risk reduction, particularly at the local level. So I'll leave it there. I know we're out of time, but thanks very much for allowing us to join. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that within the short time you made, presented an excellent overview of all the major issues, but also I think your points very well linked the different aspects that were touched upon by the different speakers. And I think the stress on development that reduces risk but is also inclusive is a challenge. And COVID-19 and climate change have only added to the challenges. So I think these are issues that we definitely need to work on, not just at the level of data that, as several of you mentioned, but also in terms of how we can convert these recommendations and insights into something concrete at the local level. Thank you again. May I request Vivek Kohli? Vivek Kohli is a representative, is a leader of the fishing community in Bombay. He also is a civil society activist. Can I request him to briefly respond in terms of his own perception of the risks for Bombay and the fishing communities? Just about 2 minutes. Vikas Kohli, sorry. Yeah. Vikas, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Actually, in terms of the risk, we have seen that floods in terms of Bombay, I think Kuliwadas are around the coastal areas. So with respect to what Mr. Dr. Krishna Achutrao said, economic impact is, measurable. So the impact, whatever, is getting lost is measurable, but the thing, people stays at the coastal areas, what they get, lost in terms of emotional this thing to their lands is, I don't know whether it can be measurable or what. Okay, so I think with regards to the Mumbai, the fishermen community is the force which I think not been utilized properly. I think, in terms of the plastic, I feel the plastic dump which goes to the sea, if that needs to be, collected through the fishermen from the sea, I think it can create a different trade route for the fishermen also to bring the plastic from the sea, and it can help the community to, start some sort of a different business other than, because of a lot of now people from various sector, they have said the hitting of the sea, and also the size of fish is also getting reduced. So it's not about now stock, it is about the size. Previously fishermen used to get the fish, let's say 4 or 5 kgs, now it is reduced to 1.5 kg, 2 kgs. So I think this is a bigger risk which in terms of the business fishermen getting into. But simultaneously, like a GPGP, Great Pacific Garbage Patch, is increasing, and this is also one of the bigger reason of a one-time plastic which is getting dumped into the sea. If fisherman force is being utilized properly, then I think some plastic will come to the shore, and we can recycle it, or probably something needs to be done with those plastic which is there in the sea or around the sea. So I think we need to, other than the climate change, we need to focus, or urban designer needs to come up with the ideas of how plastic can reduce in the sea. That needs to be taken care. This is my entire take on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vikas. That was very useful, because you know our partners Jay and Ketki working.
Jay and Ketki.
Yep. So these two aspects are extremely important aspects in our project as well. The livelihood issue that you mentioned, as well as the plastic pollution, and definitely we'll be partnering with you on this. Let's move on. Thank you. Can I request Dr. Aarti Soni, who's a scientist at the National Environmental Engineering Research Institute, and who's worked on floods here in Bombay.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, yes. Thank you for joining us.
So, good evening, everyone. So, I'll come down with the, we work for Mumbai City. I basically have done flood modeling for Mumbai City. And what I understand with the problem with Mumbai is that Mumbai region has rainfall which varies a lot. So a region like Kolaba may be having a rainfall does not understand that a northern part of the Mumbai is also having a similar intensity of rainfall. So the problem with Mumbai, which I understand while working, is that it faces the lack of availability of data. If we only talk specific about rainfall, there is only 2 meteorological stations by IMD, and there are others by MCGM also after 2006 floods. But still, we don't have, we have only 10 to 15 years of data to study the flood modeling for Mumbai. So we should now come down for Mumbai specifically for very specific to ward level rainfall to understand what is the flooding level in Mumbai and how can we design the infrastructure and how can we incorporate the changing trends in rainfall for Mumbai in our infrastructure design. So once we get to know what is the new trend in the rainfall, what are the extreme rainfall at a ward level, only then I believe that we'll be able to help in promoting or help in incorporating the studying the impacts of climate change, specifically rainfall on Mumbai region. We need to seriously come down to ward level to understand what is the rainfall trends in Mumbai. So that is the only thing I would like to add. And thank you very much, everyone, for their very guideful knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was, we know that we've been, IIT Bombay and NERI have been working for a long time on addressing floods. So the kind of practical points that you outline, and again, the stress on the local in terms of developing resilience and addressing risks, not just in terms of exposure to hazards, but understanding the infrastructure that is required and the data points. That's very useful. Thank you so much. I would now like to request Ms. Naman Gupta, who's with the UNDP, but earlier with the State Knowledge Management Center for Climate Change in Maharashtra.
Yeah,
Naman, are you there?
So good evening. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me, Professor?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So quick sort of input from my side, because I honestly feel that everybody has covered the risk element very well. In terms of, like, I do agree with the kind of risks that are faced by the coastal cities that has been highlighted by many of you. Basically, there has been a state action plan on climate change 2014 for Maharashtra, and that also have a chapter that highlights how Mumbai as a city, as a coastal city, vulnerable to climate change impacts. And all of the I think risks that have been highlighted earlier, particularly in detail by Professor Janaki Raman, have been applicable in Mumbai case also, as in Chennai. But just a couple of things that I would like to sort of share with the audience. The latest development has been that this state action plan is being revised, and in addition, Mumbai has now committed to under 2-degree coalition and C40 cities initiative. So what it means for the in terms of data related challenges or further planning related challenges when it comes to climate adaptation and mitigation is that gradually Mumbai would also be having its own climate action plan, and Mumbai would also be having some sort of inventory that highlights what are the factors that are causing climate risks to Mumbai, and what are the strategies that will be adopted by the government. Hopefully, there would be some sort of mainstreaming of climate and ecosystem conservation related strategies in the developmental programs and policies that would come in future. And this is something which is very crucial also, because one of the major risks that has been highlighted in case of Mumbai MMR, and especially when you link with the climate related disasters or coastal floods, etc., then in that case, it is the reduction of mangrove cover. And major, as you all know, that major reason has been that it has never been prioritized over developmental activities. So that's the one thing. And if this has been highlighted and this has been documented as one of the strategies also by the government, that if mangrove conservation can be done, then up to a greater extent, this climate related vulnerability of the city of Mumbai and the MMR can be reduced. So that is into consideration. One of the one of the things that are the suggestions or recommendations that maybe for the project, for the Tapestry project, researchers can be that to come up with some sort of framework which can be used by the decision maker, by the policy makers when they plan for any developmental programs. So basically, if we can have a framework wherein it can be highlighted that okay, if this developmental program or developmental activity will be implemented, then what would be its impact on the ecosystem, because ecosystem is something which is going to play a crucial role in building resilience of the coastal areas, city of Mumbai in particular. So that's the broader thing coming from my side. Given the limited time, I had a longer list of strategies which are being discussed by the state government for the coastal areas in Maharashtra. I can share it with Professor Partha maybe at later stage.
Thank you, Naman. That was very useful, especially the reiteration of the point about linking ecology, disaster management, and developmental concerns. Yeah, we will definitely be in touch with you about taking this discussion further. May I request Mr. Prem? Mr. Prem is a municipal official from Alapura and a lot of experience in the Alapi project that Professor NC was talking about. Mr. Prem?
Thank you, Professor Vijay, and good evening, everybody. As told by Mr. Narayanan of IIT, our city, Alapura, is facing a serious issue of urban flooding. For the last few years, floods have been occurring regularly in many parts of the town. In 2020, our town center, it's called Mullakala place, was unusually flooded almost a meter. Houses in the low-lying areas of the city are mostly affected by these recurrent floods. We have a wide network of canals crisscrossing in the town and bridges also. The main function of this canal network is to divert rainwater from the region to the seas and lakes during the monsoon season, and to facilitate water transfer between the sea and the lake. Initially, these canals were the main mode of transport and water resources also. By the end of transport have been improved and a total change take place, and people shifted to groundwater for their daily needs. Obviously, the utility value of the canals has declined. People gradually encroached onto the canals and dump their waste into the canals regularly. At present, a large part of the canal network has been lost due to encroachment, and the water disrupted from bottlenecks and waste dumps. During the rain days, most of the canals getting overflooded and in many places the water rose to over 1 meter. The sewage and solid waste from the canal also spread throughout the area. The water remained stagnant for days and created long exposure to the communities. The constant contact with the extremely polluted water led to the outbreak of water and mosquito-borne diseases. In the last month, there was an outbreak of diarrhea in 5 flooded wards of the municipal town itself, and that also in the heart of the town. Reclaiming the encroachment challenge in front of us as we are politicians. Most of the encroachments are made by the poor households, most of them having 2 or 3 cents of land with them. It will take time, and we need strategic interventions for it also. The only physical intervention possible in front of us is desludging of canals and replacing the bottlenecks. that will improve the capacity of the canals. We have entrusted canality with the preparation of the plans and estimates. Another important dimension in our intervention is solid and liquid waste management. The impact of urban floods mostly affects us as public health issues. So improving the sanitation is in these areas can largely bring a change in the scenario. Alpra has an outstanding record that much of recognition from even from the UN, but we have never been envisioned the aspect of floods in our waste management program. Last week we launched a new campaign named Nirmala Bhavanam, Nirmala Nagaram Phase 2. The first solid waste management campaign name was Nirmala Bhavanam, Nirmala Nagaram, Clean Home, Clean City. Now we are starting with the second phase of this Nirmala Bhavanam, Nirmala Nagaram with people participation, envisaging liquid waste management and canal waste. So Canal P is developing micro watershed waste management plans for the interventions also. So we hope that all these things will happen in the nearby days, and that is the end of my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramsey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that, the perspective of somebody who's politically involved at the municipal level is very useful, because a lot of things we can generate from our research, but practical issues on the field are things that you are aware of, both in terms of people and in terms of governance and regulations. And thank you also for bringing up this issue of looking at sanitation from the flood prevention perspective, because as you said, it's always looked at from a public health perspective, but not from flood prevention. And that's something that's important in Bombay also, as we have seen in our own research. Thank you again. So,
thank you.
Yeah. So we have reached the, I think we've covered most of our stakeholders. We're terribly running out of time. We've run out of time already. So we'd like to sum up here. If I can just post 2 questions from the audience so that we include them as well, and then we can conclude here. One question to Professor Janakarajan about the methods to collect the data that is needed, what kind of methods are required. And the second question from Ms. Renuka Thakur is about the role of systems thinking to bridge the gap between technological initiatives and existing practices as far as risk reduction is concerned, where transdisciplinarity is necessary, as she points out, and it's something very important for our project as well. But if somebody would like to comment on the need for systems thinking, and Professor Janakarajan can comment on the methods that are required to ensure that we have the kind of data that is required to reduce risks. Very briefly, if you can.
Very briefly, what I meant was that, if you really want to really reduce the risk, we need information relating to, say, for instance, the gravity and the streams and most importantly, topography. Topography. Whenever you want topography, you are only going back to 1956 topographic sheet or 1971 topographic sheet, and then it's very difficult for us to really understand what has happened in between from 1971 to 2021. So it is very important. We need to really build the topographic sheets, and also, GIS is very rarely used in the government sector, and particularly by the planners. I think GIS, it's very important tool for us to have, being used in the government sector by the planners, and that is the best way to really measure the topo sheets and also the land use and land cover images. And we don't have a scientific approach on that. You see, we got, for instance, NRSC, a National Remote Sensing Center in Hyderabad, and very rarely that data is used, very, very rarely. And for me to approach them, I need to pay a hell of a lot of money. For me to get the map for one district, I have to pay something like 80,000, 90,000 rupees. Why should I pay so much of money for to get the data? I think these data should be made available for people to make scientific analysis. And one last thing, we don't have any good database on, say, for instance, urban rivers. And we take urban rivers as a given today, but we don't know what was it like, say, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Where do I get that kind of a data? So these are some of the information that I was suggesting, and and also most importantly, for me to measure the gravity of the river, where do you get the information? So I'm in fact, I tried my best to get that information for the urban rivers in Chennai. I could not get it. I could not get it.
Thank you.
This is what
Thank you so much. Before we invite someone to respond on the systems thinking, we also have Mr. Ravindran. Sorry, I missed him out earlier. He's ex-secretary of the Maharashtra Pollution Control Board, an IAS officer. Mr. Ravindran, would you like to speak about policy issues? Mr. Ravindran, are you there? Okay, I can see that he's there, but Ravindran. Ravindran, are you there? Okay, I think he's having some connectivity or audio issues. So would anyone of the other speakers like to quickly comment on the systems thinking issues? I know that Achutarao, Krishna Achutarao and Maho Mukherjee have left, but if any of the others wish to respond, especially I think NC, if you have used it in your work.
Yes, NC, if you can do that.
Yeah, I think, basically we have to kind of integrate these, otherwise there is no way that we can do it also. So the physical vulnerability assessment is very, very much needed. And then I think GIS can actually offer us a lot of possibility on, combining these. In our experience, we found that, the social vulnerability and actually integrating it into the local governance also. So there is a lot of compromises needed. So all of that will be suboptimal when you actually kind of combine this, for example, some of it has to be, if you want to have local expertise do that, we have to, compromise certain methodologically. But at the end of the day, we found that, this it's more kind of integrated and holistic, and it can be usable also. So I think, that would be my take on it, especially, it may not be a kind of, readily publishable material, because it will be kind of, and then we have to kind of work on it if you are approaching it from an academic angle. So I think those are very, very, very important when we talk about systems and integration. And transdisciplinarity is actually very much needed. We actually work with students and also kind of, fresh graduates. And we find that, it can actually bring in better analysis to local level planning, as well as, repeated attempts to such kinds of activities can bring in accountability also to governance. I think, so that's the practical side of it. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Mr. Ravindran just messaged to say that he's having some connectivity issues. We are completely out of time, but I can see that Renuka Thakur has her hand up. So if you can just take 1 minute and then we can conclude.
Thank you very much for giving me 1 minute.
Yes.
I was fascinated to hear everyone, but the only thing I thought that one of them is highly, highlighting that we need data. Someone else is highlighting that we need a nature-based solution. Someone is saying that we need to have strategies, policies, and so on. And that's systems thinking, that we need to act and configure, or we need to have comprehensive approach to reach out everyone. For example, when we are talking about mangroves, then are the communities there know what is the importance of this? And if they know, are we giving them enough facilities to have a living out of what they are going to lose when we are going to implement another strategy? And so these are the things we need to look within the community, go to talk them, and probably there needs to be a multi-level engagement from higher level to meso level and to micro level. And therefore, I also suggested those 5 E's, and we need to take approach from 5 E's type of things. So that is what I will say just for the time which I haven't proposed.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And our apologies for not being able to give you more time, but your 5 N's are very useful. And of course, the other comments that you've given in chat, we have taken note of them. Again, very important points for us to ponder over, but also to incorporate in our research and action programs. Thank you very much for those. And thank you for joining the roundtable today. We'll definitely be in touch. I'd now like to hand over to Mihir for closing and summary.
Such a rich panel presentation and discussions, observations from the stakeholders. So would be totally impossible to either conclude or sum up or say way ahead. So I'm going to do something which will be useful to all of us, and that is to give very overarching 3 areas which come to my mind directly from all this when I remove myself a little bit from this such an active ideas and insights and information, etc. And first thing is unpacking both planning and resilience, and that's something we must do if we are looking at old cities and new risk. And we can't have the same planning, we can't have the same way of looking at sectoral concepts anymore. And also we should unpack both the destination of reaching the plan, but also the planning process itself. So that is one such a big area, maybe being an urban planner, but that is, I think, is very important. That has come up both from the presentations of the panel and the stakeholder comments. The second is to see the harm that the development process is doing, and there's a long list that has come up, but also the DRR process that is doing, and which came up somewhat later in the panel, last being Chandni, but also NCG and so on, and also before that. So how development and DRR both are actually harming nature more and more, and what could be done about that, and the nature-based solutions are the direction to go, and not only taming nature, managing nature, or even sustaining nature, go beyond that. How do we serve nature so that the solutions actually enhances the capacity as well as the strength of nature to go back to where it was. So that's the point 2 that I think about today's discussion. And third is about social science and the theme of social science within the economics of resilience building. And I think economics of resilience building is going far and far away from the social science, which it should actually bring together, in fact, make it even more central than what it is right now. And I think we are forgetting that resilience building is an inexact science. We are forgetting that even more challenging is the unfolding landscape of uncertainty. And if we want to do economics of that, we have to bring in social science to understand that landscape. We must look at concepts such as social demand for resilience, like economic demand. We should look at the resilience equity, which we are not, and we make some people more and more resilient and some people less and less. Some areas more and more resilient, some areas less and less, so on and so forth. Some sector more and more and some sector less and less. We should also look at the collective profits with individual profits, especially for private sector, but also individually, and that is something social science can help economics to do that. And I think these are some directions for us to look at how social science will be even more central than it has been so far around the economics of resilience building. So these are the three areas: unpacked planning and resilience. Second is solutions that nature can offer. And third is also about the central role that social science can play in the economics of resilience building. And to see this really visually, if any one of you have not done it so far, please go to the chat box and see two exhibitions. One of them is related to photo voices, and which is about Sundarbans, and beautiful photograph, but saying exactly what we have been discussing here. And the second exhibition is about Varsova Koliva, and Jay and Katie have done it. The first one, Shivaji Bhai has done it, and which is about coastal, low-income, informal settlement, and how it is struggling in a large metropolitan area on the coast. With these three overarching observations, conclusions way ahead, and these two requests to see the exhibition, I'd like to thank all of you again and again, all the panel members, all the stakeholders who responded. And I would like to thank all the participants, students, faculty members, researchers, also people from Japan who must be up for very late. Nobuhito-san, thank you very much. And arigato gozaimasu. And also from England, Nathan, thank you very much for your help. Of course, Pratama, how can I thank you? Thank you very much, Martha.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all once again, and bye-bye. And we hope to tap into your work in the future again. Thank you very much.